Commander Zix 427 of the Velian Galactic Research Consortium stood on the bridge of the research vessel Quantum Seeker, his four tentacles wrapped tightly around the command rail as he stared intently at the holographic projection of the blue-green planet slowly rotating before him. Earth, what a quaint name for such an unassuming world, he mused. His species, the Velians, prided themselves on their superior intellect and advanced technology. They had studied countless planets and civilizations across the galaxy, cataloging and archiving each one with meticulous detail. And yet, something about this particular planet piqued Zix's interest in a way few others had before. "Commander, our initial scans are complete," Chief Science Officer Niera 19 called out from her station, her bioluminescent patches pulsing with barely contained excitement. "You're going to want to see this." Zix glided effortlessly across the bridge, his hover pad humming softly beneath him as he approached Niera's console. "Report. What have you found?" "Well, the dominant species appears to be a bipedal, tool-using mammalian race," Niera began, her slender tentacles dancing gracefully across the holographic control panel, bringing up various data streams and analysis charts. "Initial scans show they've achieved rudimentary space flight and have developed basic atomic power, as well as a primitive global communications network. But here's the fascinating part." She paused for dramatic effect. "They still rely primarily on combustion engines and fossil fuels for energy production." A ripple of amused clicking laughter spread through the bridge as the implications of Niera's report sank in. Several junior officers didn't even attempt to stifle their mirth at the notion of such a technologically stunted race. "How charmingly quaint," Zix remarked dryly, his upper eye stalk swiveling to examine the various data readouts for himself. "And what about planetary defenses? Have they achieved any sort of unified global defense system?" "Negative, Commander," Security Chief Kral 8 chimed in from his station, his crimson carapace gleaming under the bridge illumination. "Scans show they are still fractured into disparate nation-states and factions. Their most advanced weaponry consists of chemically propelled projectiles and crude atomic devices. Nothing that could even scrape the paint on our shields." Zix felt his confidence in the mission growing with each new report. These humans, as they called themselves, were barely out of their technological infancy compared to the Velians. This expedition would be a scientific coup for him and his crew. The Galactic Research Council would surely shower them with accolades for conducting such a detailed study of a pre-spaceflight civilization. "Very well. Niera, what about their capabilities in genetic engineering and biotech?" Zix inquired, his mind already conjuring up the papers he would publish on the primitives. Surely a species on the cusp of space travel would at least be manipulating their own genome by now. Niera made a wet, sputtering noise that roughly translated to a derisive snort in Velian custom. "Hardly, Commander. They've barely scratched the surface. No sign of genetic modification, cloning, or even widespread cybernetic augmentation. They still rely on selective breeding to enhance their food sources and companion creatures, of all things." "I'm sorry, did you say, companion creatures?" Zix asked, his interest suddenly doubled. "They keep lesser species as pets." "Yes, sir," Niera replied, shaking her bulbous head in disbelief. "According to our language decoders, they've domesticated several of the planet's fauna to serve as beasts of burden, food production, and even for emotional companionship." She said the last words with an obvious note of disgust. Another wave of clicking laughter echoed through the bridge. The very notion of forming sentimental attachments to lower lifeforms was so quintessentially absurd, so primitively backwards, that it perfectly encapsulated the human's lowly station on the galactic totem pole. Commander Zix spun to face his bridge crew, his tentacles writhing with newfound determination. "You all know what this means. We have a unique opportunity here to study an intelligent race on the cusp of space-age enlightenment, untainted by outside influence. A case study in cultural and technological ascension." He pointed a muscular tentacle at the blue-green hologram, as if caressing the revolving planet itself. Prep the away team and the Xena specialist gear. We'll establish a surface outpost for close observation in one of their mid-sized population centers. This will be the most comprehensive first contact report in consortium history. As the bridge erupted into a flurry of activity, klaxons blaring and crew members scurrying to carry out their orders, Zix turned back to gaze hungrily at the holographic Earth. His name would be etched into the annals of Velian history, the commander who dared to initiate contact with such a fascinatingly naive species. The council would laud him as a pioneer, a visionary. What could possibly go wrong studying such a simple, docile people? If only Zix had known how utterly, disastrously incorrect that assumption would soon prove to be. In the bustling heart of the research vessel, the preparation chamber buzzed with frenzied activity as the hand-picked contact team geared up for surface deployment. Environmental suits were donned, equipment was checked and double-checked, crates of sensitive scientific instruments were loaded onto gravlifts. It was organized chaos, the kind any seasoned expeditionary force thrived on. Chief Science Officer Niera 19 hovered around the chamber like a tentacled hurricane, her bioluminescence flashing erratically as she barked orders and inspected her team's preparations with an exacting eye. Remember, she lectured, using her delicate manipulators to fine-tune a junior specialist's atmospheric analyzer, the humans are barely a Type 1 civilization. Their most advanced satellites couldn't pick up our scans, let alone our arrival in orbit. Our cloak is impenetrable to their primitive sensory technology. For all intents and purposes, we are invisible. Niera paused, letting the weight of that advantage sink in. That means we have a rare chance for a completely discreet, undetectable anthropological survey. We can observe the natives in their natural state, uncolored by external tampering. It's an xenosociologist's dream come true. From across the bustle of the prep chamber, Security Chief Kral 8 made a buzzing noise that conveyed the Velian equivalent of an eye roll. Assuming they don't detect us through more esoteric means. We can't underestimate them. Niera pivoted to face down the burly security officer, her tentacles writhing in annoyance. Esoteric means. Kral, they barely understand gravity and think digital computers are cutting edge. I've sifted through their entire extranet database, no sign of psionic abilities, no magicka aptitude, no evidence of multidimensional perception. They're mundane to the core. She gestured dismissively with a tentacle tip towards Kral's hulking black carapace, festooned with advanced armaments and threat detection gear. We could march into one of their metropolises in broad daylight and they'd be more likely to worship us as deities than muster any credible resistance. You can relax a few of those chromatophores, Chief. Kral bristled, flaring his red-spotted crest in irritation, but declined to press the point further as Commander Zix 427 glided into the prep chamber on his hover pad. All activity ceased as the crew snapped to attention. At ease, the commander purred, waving a languid tentacle. Status report, Niera. The chief scientist swelled with pride as she activated the main holodisplay, bringing up a slowly rotating model of their target continent. Scans complete, sir. We've pinpointed an ideal initial survey site, a remote settlement the natives designate as Hawkins, Indiana. Her nictating membranes flicked across glittering compound eyes as she savored the alien syllables. Lightly defended, minimal military presence, population circa 5,000. Hawkins, Zix repeated slowly, tasting the name. And what exactly qualifies it as an ideal candidate, Chief? Ah, funny you should ask. Niera practically bubbled over with eagerness as she launched into her spiel. It's a textbook example of North American semi-rural culture and development. Self-contained infrastructure, stable population, situated far from major political or military installations. It's the perfect eye, as the cloaked Velian shuttle descended through the wispy clouds shrouding the Earth's atmosphere. Chief Science Officer Niera 19 continued to monitor the sensor sweep of Hawkins, Indiana with rapt fascination. Look at this, Commander, she marveled, her tentacles dancing across the holodisplays. Their architecture is still primarily wood and brickwork, with a smattering of more advanced alloys and composites. Internal combustion vehicles line the streets. And get a load of that power grid, actual copper wiring on poles. Can you imagine the inefficiency? From his perch hovering behind the pilot's couch, Commander Zix 427 permitted himself a dry chuckle. Niera, we're not here to gawk. We're here to establish a foothold. Readings on potential base sites. The exobiologist nodded briskly, zeroing in on a sector of holographic Hawkins on the outskirts of the town proper. I've identified an ideal location for our surface installation. The natives call it Hawkins National Laboratory. Recently shuttered by their Department of Energy after some kind of industrial accident. The details are unclear. She pulled up a schematic of the sprawling complex, its low gray buildings and rusting chain-link fences projected in spectral blue. It's remote, already wired for heavy power draw, and best of all, completely abandoned. We can appropriate it without displacing the indigenous population or drawing undue attention. Zix nodded approvingly, impressed as always by Niera's eye for detail. Very good. Any potential threats in the area? Kral, what's your assessment? The towering security chief grunted from his grav harness, beady black eyes scanning the same hollow readout with significantly more skepticism. Minimal native military presence within 100 kilobex, he rumbled, armored digits dancing across his wrist comp a few of their National Guard units within response range, but nothing we can't handle. Although. He paused, mandibles clicking. I don't like the look of this Hawkins lab. If the primitives were toying with something dangerous enough to warrant sealing the site, I'd recommend caution. Niera scoffed, her dermal chromatophores pulsing with annoyance. Kral, they were barely experimenting with radioactive isotopes and subatomic particles. I doubt they've even achieved microfusion yet. Whatever they were up to, I'm sure we've seen worse. Stop being so paranoid. The security chief shot her a baleful glare, carapace plates flaring, but declined to press the issue. The soft whir of the shuttle's ventral thrusters and hum of the cloak were the only sounds for a long moment. I concur with Niera, Commander Zix finally declared. We'll secure the laboratory as our initial base camp. That facility should serve our needs for this phase of the operation perfectly. He turned his bulbous head, fixing his subordinates with a steely, compound stare. And we will be vigilant. The humans may be primitive, but we cannot afford to grow complacent. We underestimate them at our own peril. Am I understood? Yes, Commander. The bridge crew barked in unison, tentacles and cilia snapping to attention. As the research outpost took shape over the next few solar cycles within the bowels of the abandoned Hawkins National Laboratory, Chief Niera supervised the deployment of her xenospecialist teams with growing excitement. Velian technicians scurried through the dusty, Stygian lab facilities, converting old storage rooms and test chambers into field research stations packed with blinking instrumentation and bubbling xenobiological apparatus. Niera herself claimed the building's central rotunda as her personal command center, installing hollow emitters and a high-bandwidth subspace comm array to keep in constant contact with the orbiting mothership. The atrium's vaulted ceiling, still sporting faded murals of the periodic table and Niels Bohr atom diagrams from its days as a human research post, tickled the science officer's sense of smug superiority. Soon, human scientific ignorance would be swept away by the Velians' guiding appendages as they dragged this backwater world into the light of reason. Striding into her new sanctum on clicking carapace-shod feet, Niera immediately hailed the looming figure of Commander Zix. The base commander stood hunched over the main holodisplay of Hawkins, all four eyes narrowed as he pored over the pulsating dot map of tagged human test subjects. Commander, I'm pleased to report Phase 1 is complete, Niera announced, inclining her head respectfully. All portable field stations are online and transmitting data to the seeker. My teams are ready to begin tagging priority targets for in-depth behavioral analysis and biometric cataloging. Zix nodded distractedly, his attention still absorbed by the mesmerizing data patterns swirling at his suckers. Excellent work, Chief. What's the status of your infiltration drones? Niera practically quivered with pride. Fully prepped and functional, sir. We have a dozen submicronic surveillance mites ready for dispersal into the native population centers. Each mote is loaded with a full sensory and telemetry package, completely invisible to human senses and technology. Wherever they spread, we'll have eyes and ears. Perfect. Zix manipulated the hollow controls, zooming in on a particular neighborhood in Hawkins suburbs. Pay special attention to this family grouping here. A 90th percentile outlier in terms of recorded electroneural activity. I want to know everything about them. The Wheelers? Niera peered closer at the pulsing bioluminescent tags hovering over a modest two-story human dwelling. Intriguing. I'll assign a dedicated mote to shadow their daily activities. With luck it can hitch a ride to that school location where the juvenile humans congregate and swap data. Zix grunted approvingly, his segmented tail curling and uncurling pensively behind him. Remain on guard, Niera. I don't want us underestimating these creatures. They may yet surprise us with some unpleasant dash. He was interrupted by a sudden wail of shrill, undulating alarms from the main comm board. Every screen in the atrium erupted in a flurry of strobing amber and crimson sigils, proximity alerts, threat assessments, perimeter breaches. A booming voice thundered over the command channel. Commander, this is Kral. We have a situation in sub-level 6. Possible incursion, repeat, possible dash. A deafening roar of static and distortion swallowed the rest of the security chief's frantic hail, plunging the command center into ominous silence broken only by the emergency klaxons. Niera and Zix exchanged a stunned look of burgeoning dread. In an instant, the commander was all business, his bearings snapping to full battle alertness. Niera, with me. Zix was already moving towards the reinforced blast doors leading into the bowels of the lab at a loping, ground-eating clip only a Velian warrior elite could manage. We're not taking any chances. As Niera scampered on his heels, her scientific enthusiasm curdling to fear in her gastric pouch, she couldn't shake a sinking premonition that their mission had just stumbled into something far beyond their reckoning. The formerly pristine alien research compound had become a nightmarish hellscape of shrieking alarms, strobing crimson emergency lights, and the panicked screeches of Velian scientists as Commander Zix 427 and Chief Niera 19 came skidding to a halt outside the sealed blast doors of Sublevel 6. The once spotless bulkheads were pitted and scored with deep gashes, peeled back like the rind of some hideous fruit by forces beyond reckoning. A clinging, harbinger black ichor drooled from the tortured metal. Kral, report. Zix thundered over the command channel, his authoritative bellow barely audible over the cacophony of shrieking klaxons and subsonic rumblings emanating from the depths of the complex. What in the seven hells is going on down there? The security chief's reply was a burst of panicked, staticky barking, barely coherent, specimen containment breach, non-native bioform, not on the planetary survey. Niera threw a stricken look at her commander, her mottled green skin blanching to a sickly chartreuse. Containment breach? But that's impossible. Our bio-isolation protocols are flawless. Zix narrowed his eyes, beak clenching as he drew the pulse pistol at his hip. Impossible or not, we have a potential pandemic on our suckers. Niera, initiate full lockdown and containment, code Vermilion. Nothing gets out until we know what we're dealing with. And us? Niera raised a trembling tentacle towards the ominously dripping blast door. The wailing of emergency klaxons and sounds of distant, wet shrieks spilled from the quaking portal. Zix armed his weapon with a click and a whine of charging plasma. We're going in. On me. With no further discussion, the commander slapped the emergency release rune and shouldered through the juddering blast doors into a scene out of a lucid nightmare. Sublevel 6, once a sterile, brightly lit warren of Velian xenocontainment cubes and examination theaters, had been transformed into a dripping, Stygian cavern of twisted metal, shattered instrumentation, and a low-hanging mist with the consistency of old blood. And the bodies. Everywhere Zix cast his appalled gaze, he saw the savaged remains of his science personnel, limbs rent and tossed about like offal, guts smeared across bulkheads in obscene Jackson Pollock abstractions, ichor burbling from ruptured circulatory sacs. At the center of the abattoir crouched a tangle of misshapen, glistening black limbs and a bifurcated head studded with lamprey-like jaws. The thing was feasting noisily on the twitching remains of an eviscerated Velian technician. Zix felt a visceral urge to void the contents of his gastric pouch, but the commander in him overrode the instinct. He raised his pulse pistol to target the squirming aberration, Niera a heartbeat behind him with her own sidearm. "What is that thing?" she gasped, nictating membranes flicking across her bulbous eyes. "Trouble," Zix growled. He diverted more power to the repulsor field of his hover pad and prepared to kick off the deck plates. "Let's put it down before." The creature whipped its dripping head towards them at the sound of their voices, its distended jaws unhinging to let out a shrieking cry no living creature was ever meant to utter. The chittering, wall-crawling screech reverberated in their very bones, in their souls. Before either Velian could overcome their stunned paralysis and open fire, the thing was skittering towards them on a tangle of barbed, glistening tentacles with hideous speed and agility. "Open fire!" Zix roared. He and Niera unleashed a blistering salvo of coruscating plasma bolts, stitching the charging nightmare creature from abdomen to headplate. The air sizzled and popped with the stench of ozone and charred xenochitin, but impossibly, nightmarishly, the hissing abomination didn't slow. It barreled into them like a fleshy freight hover train, sending both Velians sprawling to the gore-slicked deck in a mad tangle of flailing pseudopods and misfiring sidearms. Niera shrieked as a glistening black talon raked across her thorax, parting the tough fabric of her uniform like gossamer and drawing an arc of cobalt ichor. Zix fared little better. He barely brought his pulse pistol up in time to parry a vicious swipe that would have torn his head from his shoulders, deflecting the jagged talons with a burst of point-blank plasma that seared his face and left him retching on the scorched reek of his own charred flesh. In a burst of desperate strength, the commander kicked out with both stumpy legs and managed to separate himself from the hissing, writhing horror by a precious meter. He dragged himself up on his hover pad, ichor streaming from a dozen wounds, and pulled a dazed Niera up by her torn collar. "Fall back," he rasped, shredded voice barely recognizable as his own. "We can't stop it, not like this. We have to seal the level." Together, the battered officers beat a fighting retreat back through the mulched blast doors, covering each other with alternating volleys of suppressing fire that barely gave the implacable creature pause. It came scuttling after them, a skittering nightmare of barbs and teeth and soulless obsidian eyes, shrugging off plasma bolts and taser nets with single-minded hunger. Zix slapped the emergency override panel with a shaking, gore-slicked tentacle, and the pitted blast doors began to grind closed with agonizing slowness. The monster put on a new burst of frenetic speed, determined to slip into the upper levels before the armored plates could shear it in half, but Niera, in a moment of desperate inspiration, fired off a crackling arc of electricity from her stun baton that caught the thing directly between its bifurcated jaws. The creature convulsed, shrieked, its exoskeleton sundering in a blast of foul-smelling smoke, just long enough for the blast doors to finally boom shut and cut off its articulated screech with ringing finality. The lockdown lights strobed crimson, bathing both gore-spattered Velians in stuttering bloodlight. For a long moment, there was no sound except for the two officers' ragged breathing and the distant, mournful wail of the emergency klaxons. "Commander!" Niera croaked, clutching her bleeding midsection. What in the name of the nebula was that thing?" Zix slowly shook his head, not trusting himself to speak. An icy dread was crystallizing in his churning guts, colder and vastly more unsettling than any monster. They had been wrong. Disastrously, arrogantly wrong. This world was not defenseless. Humanity was not weak. And the Velians, in their hubris, had awoken something ancient and hungry and utterly without mercy. "Commander!" The voice of Velox 429, Zix's second, crackled over the command channel, steeped in static and barely suppressed panic. We've got anomalies in Hawkins, converging on the lab. Biosigns and energy readings like nothing I've ever. Nebula's teeth, I think they know we're here. A deep, groaning rumble shook the entire complex, and the deck plates below their feet began to shudder and warp. Dull, booming impacts, growing louder. Closer. Something was coming. We're leaving, Zix hissed through a mouthful of his own blood. Mission abort. Niera stared at him, shock and pain blending on her maimed features, but Zix cut off her building protest with a slash of his tentacle. No arguments. Set the auto-destruct and purge the site from orbit if you have to. We're getting off this forsaken death world before it's too late. As the two haggard Velians limped their way towards the evac points, a new dread sank its icy talons into Zix's hearts. He had a sickening feeling that it might already be too late, for them, and for the galaxy. They never saw the huge, shaggy shape detach from the shadows of the access corridor behind them, luminous eyes narrowing as it raised its heavy head and loosed an eerie, warbling howl into the crimson dark. Other shapes unfolded from hiding spots throughout the facility, swift, hulking nightmares of fang and claw. Commander Zix 427 limped through the debris-choked corridors of Hawkins' lab in a reeling daze of pain, terror, and furious incomprehension. Blood seeped through the rent in his chitinous breastplate, each rasping breath jolting him with fresh agony. But the pain barely registered next to the animal fear coursing through his veins, shrilling beneath his carapace in an ancient, presapient scream, run. Hide. Survive. Evacuation alarms pulsed through the complex like a faltering heartbeat, underscored by the groan and shriek of tortured metal as something massive and impossibly strong peeled back bulkhead after reinforced bulkhead in a methodical hunt for Velian flesh. The creature's eerie, ululating howls vibrated in Zix's bones, in the core of his wounded soul. How had it all gone so wrong, so fast? One moment they were the pinnacle of interstellar civilization poised for another textbook subjugation, the next they were mulling prey cowering in the dark as an unimagined apex predator tore their last redoubt apart around them. Zix's thoughts whirled with Niera's stricken recrimination, we were wrong. Nebula have mercy, we were so wrong. Speaking of the chief scientist, she was doing little better than Zix as they staggered to the evac point together, propping each other up like two punch-drunk fighters circling the drain. Her pale green skin was sheened with shock sweat, and her compound eyes had a concussed, thousand-yard glaze. She'd stopped trying to staunch the weeping gash through her abdomen, energies reserved for placing one wobbling claw in front of the other. I don't understand, she kept muttering, as if the mantra could hold the collapsing reality at bay. It's not possible. What was that thing? Where did it come from? Later, Zix growled, in no mood to indulge her grasping recriminations. Let's focus on getting to the shuttle first. Grieve the dead once we're off this nebula-forsaken rock. The shriek of shearing metal was their only warning. Zix barely had time to shove Niera aside before the ceiling above them erupted in a welter of sparks and raining debris, a massive shaggy bulk plunging into the corridor like a meteorite. The thing landed in a predatory crouch, lips peeling back from yellow fangs the length of Zix's forearm. It was a creature out of a primal nightmare, a hulking, snout quadruped covered in a shag of coarse, spiny fur, with four baleful yellow eyes glittering with feral cunning above a bristling beard of sensory tendrils. Zix caught a glimpse of scythe-like talons gouging the deck plates, a lashing, spiny tail, then the monster was rearing up on its hind limbs with fluid grace and loosing another eerie, warbling howl that shook the bulkheads. Niera screamed. Zix thrust her behind him and raised his mangled pulse pistol, squeezing the firing stud with the desperate strength of a doomed man determined to die on his feet. A crackling lance of blue-white plasma sizzled from the barrel and caught the looming horror right between its four lambent eyes. And spattered harmlessly off in a shower of sparks and a reek of scorched hair. The creature shook its heavy head, more annoyed than injured, then lunged with terrifying speed. One swipe of its shovel-sized paws sent Zix and Niera sprawling against the far bulkhead, weapons and limbs flying. Niera shrieked as her mangled abdomen took the brunt of the impact, a shocking gout of cobalt blood splattering the deck. Zix felt something give way in his thorax with a liquid crunch, and suddenly every breath was molten agony. Through the grey haze of pain, he saw the creature turn its shaggy head to regard them with cold, pitiless eyes. It padded closer on its four prehensile limbs, drool slithering between its bared fangs. Savoring the kill. And no. Zix croaked, scrabbling for his pistol with a bloody tentacle. All his vaunted training, his honed Velian strength and guile, and he was about to be torn apart by a dumb beast on an insignificant backwater. The ultimate insult. Niera dragged herself upright beside him with a rattling wheeze, her eyes fever-bright with agony and dawning revelation. She clutched a cracked datapad in one trembling claw and turned it to face the advancing monster, the jagged screen strobing with a chaos of Velian bioanalytic runes. "I know what you are now," she rasped at the creature, a hideous wonder in her voice. "Ursus astrum. Vulpine thanatosi." The monster paused. Cocked its massive head. Zix stared at her, uncomprehending. "Stellar bear," Niera translated, each word a blood-flecked gasp. "Star fox. Void wolf. 100 cultures, 100 names for the darkest of legends." The beast growled low in its shaggy throat, the sound reverberating in Zix's hollows. "We thought your kind were extinct. Myths to frighten hatchlings." A watery chuckle. "The only sentient native predators of ancient Velar itself. Our darkest primitive shadow, risen to stalk us between the very stars." The monster took another purposeful step forward, lips skinning back from its fangs, and in its burning yellow eyes Zix saw the primordial promise of retribution unending, of a billion-year evolutionary arms race coming full circle. Predator and prey, locked in an eternal dance. "Commander." Niera croaked, her eyes filming over. "I think we may have made a grave error in judgment." The towering creature lunged, a blur of fur and fang, and the last thing the commander of the Velian survey mission saw was a flash of seething yellow eyes and a descending maw large enough to swallow him whole. Then, only a roar of static, a shock of terrible cold, and darkness everlasting. Velox 429, acting commander of the Velian exploratory mission, sat hunched over the holodisplay of the research vessel Quantum Seeker's darkened bridge, his chitinous brow furrowed in shell-shocked disbelief as he pored over the calamitous reading spooling across the Technicolor glyphs. 99.7% casualty rate among the ground teams. The outlying field bases overrun and obliterated. Chief Niera's life sign winking out in a terminal flatline. And the agonized final transmission from Commander Zix, his shrieks of mortal terror abruptly silenced by a wet, crunching static. It had all happened so fast. Too fast. One moment the subjugation of the primitive backwater called Earth had seemed a foregone conclusion, the next, an unimaginable apex predator had emerged from humanity's darkest legends to hunt the hunters, turning Velian science outposts into blood-spattered abattoirs with terrifying ease. They had sown the wind, and reaped a whirlwind of fang and claw. Velox shuddered, feeling the icy coils of primordial dread constrict around his cardiopulmonary organ. The creatures, void wolves, Chief Niera had called them with her dying breath, had torn through the Velian expedition like a fusion torch through aerogel. Defenses that had weathered the might of a dozen warlike spacefaring species had proven utterly ineffectual. Armor-piercing flechettes and plasma lances had spattered off night-black fur like summer rain. By the nebula, what were these monsters? What eldritch evolution had sculpted such flawless, pitiless killing machines? And the humans, those soft, simpering apes the Velians had dismissed as uncultured primitives, had the audacity to keep such creature as pets. To ally with the bloody things, if the scattered reports filtering up from the surface were to be believed. No. This could not stand. Would not. The Velians had not risen to the apex of the galactic food chain by baring their throats to uncultured planetary barbarians. Velox would see the human infestation and their feral attack beasts purged from the cosmos, even if he had to. A bone-rattling shudder ran through the ship from prow to stern, the lighting guttering and the holodisplay flickering with ugly static. Damage alarms shrieked to life on all decks. Velok's world, compound eyes widening in disbelief as the tactical plot erupted in a glaring nebula of hostile contact runes. Commander. The panicked voice of a junior bridge officer bled through the overburdened comm channels. Incident in the portside landing bay. Intruder alert. It's coming from inside dash. The transmission cut off in a burst of ugly, wet static. Velok slumped back in the command couch, staring at the madly pulsing threat displays with something beyond mere terror, beyond sanity itself. The elegant curves of the Quantum Seeker's hull schematics strobed a bloody crimson as hostiles rampaged through the vital sections, engineering, life support, computer core. His ship was being taken apart from the inside out. And in that moment of yawning, staring cosmic horror, Velok's 429 finally understood the fatal depth of his species' hubris. Not only had they catastrophically underestimated the threat lurking on that unassuming blue marble, those devil-spawned humans and their Valerian shadow breed had already been here, seeded throughout the stars like a malign virus eons before the Galactic Council first congressed. Waiting. Watching. Humanity had not taken to the stars. The stars had always belonged to humanity. The bridge blast doors screeched and buckled behind him, warping inward under the assault of something massive and unspeakably strong. Velok slowly reached for the command codex with a trembling tentacle, biomechanical safety interlocks clicking back one by one. If he could not win, then he would at least see this misbegotten rock purged from the galaxy in cleansing fire. The final lock clicked back. The string of imperative runes meaning, commence orbital bombardment, glowed an ominous red beneath his suckers. The armored hatch exploded inward in a hail of shrieking shrapnel. Something huge and black and terrible shouldered through the jagged rent, luminous yellow eyes sweeping the smoke-choked ruin of the bridge. A resonant growl shivered through the twisted deck plates, the primal music of a perfect predator. Velok keened a clicking wail of mortal despair as he slapped the glowing runes, and the creature pounced, a blur of obsidian fur and flashing claws, swallowing his piteous final scream in a single convulsive crunch. The codex tumbled from Velok's slack tentacles and clattered to the deck, the glowing bombardment runes fading back to no black. A shaggy, massive paw settled almost gently atop the inert holoslate, dagger-like claws gouging the alien alloy. Above, monstrous lips skinned back from still-dripping fangs, the Velian's ichor hissing on the scorched deck. The station had been taken with an efficiency any Velian commando would envy, resistance eliminated, the command crew slain to the last gelatinous sack. And Earth need never know how close it had come to annihilation this day. The behemoth gave a satisfied woof, its spiny hackles settling. It nosed one of the intact hollow interfaces with surprising delicacy, and the view screen bloomed with a chaos of glowing glyphs. Fortaloned paws danced across the fluid haptic surface, splicing into the comm relays with ease, and after a moment a human face resolved from the static, square-jawed and craggy, eyes flinty behind anachronistic glasses and a broom of a mustache. "Good boy, Kane." The man's lips quirked. "I knew we could count on you and the pack." The hulking creature, Kane, huffed in response and cocked his head, tongue lolling as if to say, "Was there ever any doubt?" "Omega Protocol is in effect," the man continued grimly. "I want that site sanitized and any stragglers, contained with extreme prejudice. The rubes can't ever know how close we just came to a ELE." He pushed his glasses up his hawkish nose. "The men in black have enough on our plate already with the greys and reptoids mucking about. Last thing we need is the damn jellyfish sticking their pseudopods where they're not welcome." Kane the Void Wolf made a soft baying sound of agreement, bushy tail thumping against the command chair. "Good hunting." "And Kane." The man's flinty eyes softened fractionally. "You're a good boy." "Yes you are." The screen went dark. Kane stretched his shaggy bulk, joints popping, already mentally cataloging the night's hunting and grudging belly rubs to come. Hawkins had been defended, the soft-meat humans would remain blissfully unaware, and balance was maintained. All in a day's work for a stalwart void wolf of the MIB's first extrasolar detachment K-9 unit, Monsters vs. Aliens, Task Force. With one last whiff of satisfaction, he turned and loped off the bridge, heavy paws liquefying purple ichor, to prowl his hard-won domain until the human cleaners arrived. The stars were safe in his keeping once again.